No, no buzz. The Just Bees Book Club. It's a book club just for bees. Today, I listened to China Miéville and Keanu Reeves' The Book of Elsewhere about, I don't know, a month ago, an audiobook. So we doubly don't have a copy to hold. Actually, I did have a physical copy, but it's neither here nor there. I came away from this book thinking that it was real mediocre. I've continued to think about it though, so I think there's probably something to it. The the broad sketch of the book is that I guess Reeves has been writing a comic called Berserker. No, not that Berserker since 2021, and it seems like he approached Miéville. I have heard stories of him buying Miéville's books from a coworker from a different location, another location, a different bookstore at a different time. Um, and I guess Miéville took it on. It's his first fiction since his first novel since God. It's something after Embassy Town, right? Like the Three Moments of an Explosion. There's October and the Communist Manifesto one. Um, God, I can't think of his last novel. At one point in my life, I was a medieval completionist. I've always been positive on Reeves as an actor, generally speaking. Um, there was some swirling stuff around Miéville a couple of years ago that I don't really know what the end result was, and so I've been a little trepidatious about continuing to read him. But that's not a not alleging anything. Just sometimes you kind of grow over an author, out of one, and I kind of felt like, speaking of which, coming soon a Murakami video. Um, I've just been, I've been like not sure. Although he was like deeply important in introducing me to the new weird, and in so doing, introducing me to the broader sense of weird fiction. I have many very strong memories of many of his novels, and I think one of the problems with this book that I identified initially came off to me when I first read it as um, I had the impression that it was more of a direct collaboration between Reeves and Miéville, whereas it seems, based on at least the like snippets I've read of interviews and things like that, that it was more that they both sort of came to terms with what could and couldn't happen, that they had conversations throughout, but that Miéville was the primary author. In the audiobook version, which I think is pretty neat, there's a neat moment where I believe Reeves does the introduction, basically, the like the prologue, I guess, like reads it, and then Miéville, I believe, reads all of the sort of like past past chapters that are written in the second person, which was neat. He did quite a good job, I think. Yeah, story of Unite, or B, this immortal warrior who has been alive for like 80,000 years, I want to say is the number they give repeatedly. But this story specifically takes place in roughly present day, in like a sort of Black Ops alternate present, or in an alternate present where there's a Black Ops team of the government. I can't remember if they're attached to a specific branch explicitly or not. Um, and their sort of their willing participation with B or Unite sort of investigating what his whole deal is, and that is interwoven with things like chapters like Unite sort of in the second person relating his own past, or somebody relating it to him, I guess would be the like structural assumption that's happening there. Those are largely really interesting. Those sort of like resolve into this question of the Babirusa, which turns out to be an immortal hog, basically, that sort of always eventually comes back to engage. But there's also a lot of just sequences of point of view chapters from people in that Black Ops team, from his psychologist, from his commanding officer, those sorts of things. Um, as I was saying, the thing I sort of initially thought was that it's when I thought it was more of a direct collaboration between the two, is that a lot of passages come across as though they are written by somebody who is very engaged with visual media, like film and comics, and has maybe written for those or been around people who've written for those for a long time, because they're just like these really clunky passages like throughout that are just like moments where it's like 2-3 pages. I'm assuming I haven't read the physical version, obviously, so I'm giving just a an assumption, I guess, where like things will happen, like you'll get 2 pages of rumination about something before it seems like the writer goes, "Oh, I should establish this in like a grounded reality. Like, oh, there's like there should be a this should be a scene, not just not just a sort of free floating character blabbing moment." And then they'll be like, "Oh yeah, and this is all in a break room at the headquarters, and that's why when the guy comes in, the chair gets kicked at him or whatever." Just like a lack of attentiveness um, to the physical reality of things at times, and that is not a thing I really associate with Miéville. I think historically, I think he's always been very good at um, when he's doing just like somebody's got to think through something. He just does that. He doesn't like try to couch it in a more specific thing. Um, I had a friend read it. Uh, the friend sort of working theory was that maybe Mieva was trying to sort of like write down in a way that he was just not particularly good at, and we had a lot of interesting conversations about the relative ability of authors to sort of engage with the style of other authors, to pastiche, et cetera, et cetera. And sort of through the synthesis of those two reactions over the course of a month and a half, I think what I've really come down on is that China Miéville doesn't write pulp very well, which is funny, sort of, right? Because he's a new weird writer. The sort of tradition that he's sort of always worked in, or maybe one of the main ones at least, is very literally just like entirely materially dependent on the pulps of the 20s and 30s. Lovecraft being the sort of obvious touchstone there. Miéville has written many words about Lovecraft. He has very interesting thoughts about him. Vandermeer has said very interesting. Jeff Vandermeer has said very interesting things about Miéville's relation to weird fiction and that whole sort of movement of the mid 2000s, early 2010s. Still sort of ongoing, but not nearly as sort of culturally important, I don't think, at this point. But and maybe I should say pulp action specifically, because from what I can tell, Berserker is a pulp action comic that is getting turned into a novel by Miéville, and I think he is not so much writing down or trying to engage with at the level of Reeves like fiction. It's just that I think he is writing his own shit and then being like, "Oh right, I have to do the shit that's like honest to the source material," and so he'll have written a long thing and then remember all of a sudden that there needs to be an action sequence or whatever, and so it gets shoehorned into the scene, and I think that's a bummer because it makes reading the book sometimes annoying. And maybe it's the case. I'm entirely willing to admit this. Maybe it's the case that has been happening throughout Miéville's fiction for a long time. Because again, I have not read him. I think he's an excellent writer on his own terms, and I would bet that I would still stand up on that, uh, at least to a certain extent. I know. I mean, I haven't reread Perdido in a long time, not since like remembering or being it remember having it been talked about how fucking weird the ending of that book is with um God, if it's been 15 years, I cannot remember her name, but the main lady with the beetle head and how her whole thing ends being kind of weird. Um, yeah, I don't know. The sort of inciting incident of the book, right, is there's a weird raid where another rando who's just like on the team that Unite sort of leads dies, but then comes back to life, and there's big questions of what is animating Unite or B's ongoing existence, because he's not immortal in the sense that he can't die. He's immortal in the sense that whenever he dies, he sort of seems to reconstitute, and there's long discussions of that, and many of them are really interesting. Um, and like I'm not getting into the specifics because I don't remember the specifics because it's been a month or whatever. Longer than that by the time this comes out, of course, because scheduling. It's a weird, sticky thing. It's gritty in my brain at least, for which I will say I'm glad I read it, even though I have feeling that it's not a particularly major work from either of them. I don't think it's going to stick with me forever, but it was an interesting sort of moment in what's going on with Miéville, in what him writing in this style does and does not work, in what Reeves is interested in as a creator with sort of presumably more or less complete creative control in a way that I don't think he's ever really had. I'm not as much of a completionist or aficionado on him as I am or as I have been on Miéville. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's a sort of a tourist thing that has made it stick with me. I don't know if it's that just some of the ideas are genuinely interesting. I think that is true, but yeah, it just I mean, I came away from it feeling like, wow, like perfectly well done, but really clunky, and I left it a couple months later thinking like, why am I still thinking about this fucking book? Which is not nothing. Thanks for not watching.